Right, I've hit the button that says go live, and so supposedly 8 minutes in, or whatever it is, something should be happening, but it's not. Right, let's go into there, hit the go live button on there, see what's occurring. It says it should be. It says I'm live. It says I'm on and in public, no restrictions, bloody bloody blah. So I click on stream. It should show me what's actually happening. No. Go back onto that. It says that I'm live. It says that I'm live, but it doesn't show me that I'm live. Oh, God. Oh, great being that set us all up. Why did you have to make things so difficult for us mere mortals? If I click on there, am I actually there? Yes, I am. Oh, wow, there we go. So, right, hello, Stephen. I click on there. Am I actually there? Yes, I am. Oh, wow, there we go. So, hello, Stephen. Right, I'll tell you what happened. I'll mute that. Well, I'll put that onto headphones. It actually says I'm live, which is probably good. Dong, there we go. Right, okay. Take two. Ta-da! Right, okay, I'll just sort of tell you what was going on. There's been a big major. Yes, this is as live as I'm going to get, Kelvin. There was a major Windows update, which you may or may not have been aware of, and it decided, despite my using everything, it says I'm live, despite my using everything as per normal, it decided that it was going to switch inputs and things to the streaming software. So although I had everything set up and I had pictures and everything else, which I've lost because I had to do a reboot, it disconnected my microphone. There was no sound, but only on the software that this was going to use. Other software is working, and that's basically the way of life, isn't it? You know, these things just are sent to try us. Anyway, enough of that. How are you guys doing? We got Stephen and we got Kelvin. Just click on the like because I'm here as well. That makes three. That makes three of us. And yeah, I was going to say, well, if you've seen the title of this one, it says, "What's the meaning of hi-fi?" And having watched quite a few. Having watched a few YouTube, I'm just trying to clear my screen. I've got piles of cassettes here. Look. Placido Domingo, A Night at the Opera, not the Queen version, but that's Placido, and Mr. Pavarotti as well there, which is all very nice. I've started digging in that box, and these are now listed on eBay. Probably recognise those. They're CDing 2s, which are rather nice. The lady, and it was the same lady as the Crosley turntable and all the records. She was a real avid music collector. I mean, she wasn't into hi-fi, which is sort of where my questions are coming from today, really, because let's see, Kelvin, I've just had to do a Windows update. How annoying, but it's always on a Wednesday. Should really use my Linux laptop for this. Yes. When my wife did she did the update yesterday, or the update happened yesterday, and it's put a little search bar thing, you know, with on her taskbar down the bottom. Hasn't done that to mine, but my laptop I use upstairs, which is the one I use for doing all the capturing, that one's got a search bar right in the middle of the home screen now. I don't know what's happened to this thing. This is my pucker computer, but I don't know what's happened to this, other than the fact that it disconnected my flipping audio system. And I don't know if you've ever tried playing with OBS. It is OBS is to multi-studio stuff, a bit like Audacity is to audio editing and stuff. It's very functional, it's very good, but they don't stick things in exactly where they should be. So it's not friendly, and that's just sort of one of those things. Maybe Michael Pham will come in today, because he put a thing on one of the previous ones. Yeah, it's just a bit weird. Anyway, what I did produce, and I must have lost them. I asked Bing, have you guys seen the new Bing? My channel is supposedly technology, not just cassettes, which is why I'm trying to get into some of the, which is why I'm trying to get into some of the other sort of things like the 78 records and whatever. And Bing has been quite, the new version, the Chat GPT version of Bing, it's been quite good. It'll draw pictures for you now, and it doesn't charge you for it. And I had this gorgeous picture, which I won't be able to pull back because it was only generated, of a baby lion. Not a lion cub, but a baby lion. And it was lovely. I'll see if I can get it to produce another one. Welcome back, it says. So if you use the controls, please, I find it gets the arse if you don't be polite to it. Please can you draw a picture of a fully grown baby lion. That's what I asked it for before, and I will cut away if I can remember how to do it. Yeah, there we go. You'll have to put up with me in the box. So fade, dump. There we go. So I've just typed in there, can you draw a picture of a fully grown baby lion? If I click on there, it goes off and says, don't know. And then it sits there and waits for a while. And it says, sure thing, here's a picture of a fully grown baby lion. And I'm hoping it will reproduce the one it had before, or something similar. And I'll tell you why shortly. Oh yeah, look, there we go. Now, isn't that gorgeous? It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. You've got the lovely lion's face there, and you've got the fluffy bits there. So it's got an old lion's face on a baby lion's body. And then I asked it to draw me please a picture of a stern looking fully grown lion. I don't know what this is going to come up with either. Actually, I think that one's possibly nicer. Well, no, but that's more what I asked for. So that's that. Bear with. Bing is thinking. Did you go back to the Flintstones where they had the whenever they did something like took a picture, there was a bird inside with a slab of flint or so, flint knives and chisels and carving pictures into slate. Now this, I think you'll agree, is a stern-looking, fully grown lion. And if you do what I did originally, what I was intending to do was, let's see. So there's your fully grown. Oh, there we go. And I was going to use this to try. Oh, come back. There we go. I was going to try and illustrate the difference between hi-fi and sound generation. Now you have to bear with me on this. This is thinking outside the box, which I don't know if you noticed, I do that quite a bit. I ramble on, but very often I think outside the box. Where's my fully grown line gone? There's my other one. No. Oh, he's around here somewhere. Anyway, that's a baby. Let's bring the fully grown one back. So, there we go. There's your stern looking. One day I'll get this right. There we go. There's the two side by side. Now, my thoughts were, see if we can get it to be a similar scale. What's the difference between that baby fully grown line and that fully grown line? Well, apart from the fact he's looking stern. And my principles behind it were that when you've got a hi-fi system, you put in something that's small, i.e. signal from a magnetic cartridge or a cassette tape player or even FM tune or whatever, and you make it bigger. But you don't want to put in something small and get out something bigger that's just obviously related, but not the same thing, do you? You want to have a bigger sound than what you put in. So think of it as sound. You put in a small sound, that being the millivolts or microvolts, and you get out volts, which drives the speakers. So that's what I was doing there, and I lost all that. Anyway, so you've had to see that. But anyway, isn't Bing clever? But I asked it for some sharp stones the other day, and it said no, it's inappropriate. You have to be careful what you ask it for, because it won't do anything. It thinks he's... I bet if you tried to get it to produce a picture of a blue tit, it wouldn't do it. Anybody want me to try? It's an interesting... Oh, by the way, that's the subscriber count at the moment. It's going up. Need more. People, need more. 5615. Make it more. Anyway, yeah, that's what's occurring. Don't know how that's happening. It says it's upcoming, really. And then we got... Still says it's upcoming. And then we got me there. So let's get rid of me there and put me on... well, we'll get rid of you. Display capture. There I am. Oh, yes. And then I shall give you the privilege. But there we go. Right. Anyway, that was interesting, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Because that was what I was originally going to do, and I did actually produce a lovely picture, which I'll see if I can pull up, which was an illustration of something. If I click on that again, and click on that again, it should all be there. No, that's not the right one. That's the one I want. Right, okay, so if I pull up just this another pictorial. I've been doing pictorials, I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry. Let's have a look. Open them all. Right, okay. This one you might find a little bit interesting. If we got anybody from America watching, I know they don't tend to be on the live, but if they watch the replay, might find this one of interest. Let me just select that screen again. This is, believe it or not, a chandelier, and I spelled it with an S, but that's because I was thinking of shandy. This is a chandelier of the White House, and it's a gorgeous picture. And you can see I can make it bigger, all in proportion, and it's still a gorgeous picture. It's just a gorgeous picture. Now, follow the logic here. If that was sound, and that was being fed into my my hi-fi system, what would I want to come out? I'd want a bigger version of it, wouldn't I? But I don't know if you noticed, it just fits within the frame. So if I went for a bigger version, you might get this problem. No, you get this problem. If you try and get more sound out of your stereo system than it's capable of doing, it cuts it off. And so whilst what's in there is lovely, it's got bits missing. And you've already had a sneak preview of the other one, this one. This is what happens if you turn your bass and treble up too high, or whatever. You change what you're looking at. It goes from being that, which is gorgeous, to that. And that's what EQ and all that does, and that's why you have to be careful with it. Anyway, it was only similes. I thought, maybe it would be a good illustration of why a good hi-fi system should put out a bigger version of what's put in. That's what you put in, that's what you get out, complete with the golden trim. Not something like that where the EQs are wrong, or something like that where you're banging the limits and it's just not going to work right. Anyway, enough of that. Right, let's see if I click on here. No. Back to me. Possibly. Boom, bum, 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 bum. There we go. Yeah, back to me. Now, all I've got to do now is try and find me on there, which is easier said than done. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever tried using two screens, but it's really useful and it's really confusing. Let's get rid of the Bing Lions. Aren't they cute? Did anybody like the Bing Lions? Kelvin. Stephen says, I don't think hi-fi really exists anymore. You either buy audio pulp or audiophile stuff. The stuff in between is mostly gone. Yes, I think you're possibly right. Kelvin says hi-fi is an outdated term in my humble opinion. Based on its specifications from the late 50s, even a cheapo smartphone exceeds them. I know what you mean, as in the specifications for what hi-fi is. But let's face it, that is not going to sound as good as a. I've got one of those. Talking about sound, I've got a rather nice Alexa. Alexa, play something.
Here's a mix for you on Amazon Music.
Alexa, volume 9. Alexa, shush. That's just an illustration. Actually, what I was trying to prove there was that it actually sounds quite nice. That's a big Alexa. That's one of the ones that's that size. It's like it's about the size of your head, or about the size of my head. Not the little puck jobbies. And it sounds very good. And because it's round, it doesn't sound boxy. So we got on here Andrew Hyde. I think most of the in-between zone is populated by Bluetooth speakers or home or project studio music monitoring. You just operated my Alexa too. Did you get the same mix? But Bluetooth speakers are mostly mono. How can it be hi-fi when playing a stereo source? Has anybody seen my video on why they stick stereo speakers right next door to each other? I shall wait and see if anybody comes up with an answer. There was a very interesting... Well, it's I can understand that, Kelvin. He says, I'm not letting Alexa spy on me. I don't care. It's either going to be totally shocked or totally bored. I'm a bit like hi-fi. I'm one extreme or the other. But yeah, there's enough advantages. We use it for our shopping. Amazon know exactly what we're buying, as do Tesco's, and all that sort of thing. In the end, you just gotta go with it. But yeah, I do know what you mean. Bluetooth speakers are mostly mono. That's a bit of a statement there, Stephen. That's sort of true of the little ones. I got a little looks like a jet engine one, and that sounds nice, but it's mono. I mean, most people would tell you that hi-fi started off as mono, and what you've got to remember is, and this is where it can be quite interesting actually, and I'm willing to be argued with or whatever, but I'll put forward this bit. If you record a source in mono, when you play it back in mono, it can be hi-fi. Andrew Hyde. I'm actually listening to this on little Bose SoundMix Mini, and they are stereo, and the low end is quite impressive. Yes, well, the thing what we use, my wife and I used a lot, is it's a Brick. It's the I did the video on it. I can't remember the name of it now. Let me go and have a look. Live streaming, no. If I go to channel content, I'll lose you guys, but I can find it. Soundcore. Soundcore, yes, the Anker Soundcore 2, which is on there. Just show you it's on there. It's on the video. It's the video on there, and that is actually a stereo Brick. And what they've got is that on that end, which you can see the little vidIQ thing up, they've got one speaker, and then they've got a thing, and then they've got some tweeters in the middle. It's got really not very good separation because it's only as wide as nothing really. But the sound quality is absolutely superb for a thing of its size. It's absolutely amazing. I'll tell you what we use it for. It's got I'm trying to find me again. I'm on here somewhere. What we use it for is my wife does singing and singing lessons and stuff, which is fine. And what we've need. If you've ever done anything to do with mobile anything, what we've got on here now. In fact, if I had mono records, I'd get a mono cartridge for the Technics. Yes, hang on, let me see. So Stephen says, agreed, mono can be hi-fi, but only if the source is mono. In fact, if I had mono records, I'd get a mono cartridge. Right, okay. Andrew Hyde says, oh dear. Now starts a discussion about mono Beatles LP versus the stereo digital. No, we're not having that one. That would be a good centre speaker for a TV. Yeah. I actually had a 5.1 surround sound. I mentioned it the other week. And I had this really nice Yamaha. It was that wide and it's that thick. And it was a centre thing. And it was so boxy. It was horrible. And I never used the centre speaker for any sort of level because it was so horrible. But, I mean, Yamaha, if they can't make a decent speaker. The argument about mono and stereo is, if you've got I'd always record anything in stereo because obviously there's more sound to be had. We've got one ear and we've got two ears. And if you're as old as I am, and if you've just had labyrinthitis, you get, and I know Stephen was talking about this the other day, you get whistling accompanying everything you do, around about the 5 kilohertz, I think they say. As the tinnitus kicks in. However, what I was going to say was the Brick. The reason we bought it originally was because it took a 3.5mm, 1/8 inch, whatever it is, jack input as an aux input. And my wife used some rather nice microphones, which I just happen to have one here, for exercise classes, because she teached exercise classes. And these things they have on their, it's obviously a transmitter, but they have a receiver. Looks almost exactly like that, and it has a 3.5mm jack plug on the end. And what we found was, if you are ever doing anything mobile, and we were taking trampolines around in a trailer, 14 kilograms each they weighed. We had 22 trampolines in a trailer at 14.5 kilograms each, plus other stuff, which meant it weighed a hell of a lot. And first day we took it out, something bounced and jammed the door, so we couldn't get the door open. And next day something else happened. So what we ended up doing was everything that could possibly move was tied down. Everything that couldn't move was tied down again. I'd put a winch in so that we could get the stuff in and out, because the door was 1.5 meters wide at the back of the trailer, and the actual trampolines were 1 meters wide. So there was about that much clearance, body width clearance on the trampolines to the doors. And at the end we had this winch, which was the cheapish winches, about 40 quid each, that you have in a body. And one of the cables had managed to wind itself around itself such that it actually wouldn't allow the flipping thing down. I mean, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So we've always, since then, we've always made sure that we take 2 amplifiers with us. We take more than 1 microphone, etc., etc. And one of the things we did, and it came in very useful, was there's a video of it. We went to a Christmas thing, doing Christmas singing, and it was lighting the Christmas tree. It was for a local charity, and it was for a charity providing service, which was the Gobstoppers in Berkhamsted. And so we went to do the singing around the Christmas tree while they turned the lights on, and we were meant to have power, but they didn't have power. But what we did have was, because it was us doing it, we had the brick. So we had the 150 watt amplifier, and we had the 2 times 8 watt brick. And wow, it worked. We actually managed to do it running on its own battery. And that's what we always do. Always double it up. Now let me see what's going on here. There's conversation going on here. And I retrofitted a 1986 Hitachi 3D Super subwoofer ghetto blaster with a Bluetooth module. That's a good idea. And Kelvin says that's a great blaster. Yes, they were good, those. Andrew Hyde says thanks. Corresponsive 155, or Stephen, says Bluetooth is convenient. I'm sure it works well. I actually like Bluetooth. I think it's one of those things that is getting better. Didn't like it originally, but it's getting better. There was a very interesting film a few years ago, many years ago, and there was a guy who was a bit of a nerd, and I think it might have been a Jimmy Stewart film, and he took his girlfriend back, or a fella back, to his apartment to show him his stereo system. It was quite an important part of the murder mystery plot, I think. And he explained that when he switched it on, it was going to take about 2 or 3 minutes before any sound would come out, and then it was that, and he was really very, very proud of this really expensive turntable thing. And he switched it on and went hum, and it just goes to show how hi-fi has changed nowadays. That was considered normal. Bluetooth is convenient. I'm sure it works well. Yes. I've found as I said before, the headphones are very good. Now they're doing this using the Bluetooth 5, which is low latency, so you can actually use it quite well with televisions and things. And there's also lossless codecs as well, which is quite good. Right. What else was there? The Alexa I've got, as I say, is one of the big ones. It's round and it goes thump thump thump. Now I was at a very interesting. This is also what made me think about this subject, and I'm open to anybody's suggestions. But how many people here listen to music, and how many people here listen to the equipment that the music's on, and is there an overlap? Because I'll tell you for why, but I've got to have a slurp. Calvin, 2 films to watch: Clockwork Orange and The American Psycho for some high-end gear. Aha. I'll have to check those out. American. I don't think I've seen American Psycho. I've seen Clockwork Orange. That's I actually bought the DVD when it came out, and that's the one where they got the bloke strapped in the chair with the his eyes being forced open. I remember not being able to see that at the cinema, as in I wanted to. They wouldn't let me in. I was too young. I've forgotten what I was saying now. It's very difficult doing this multitasking. I've got a finger here that's just waving around, trying to find something to do. It's trying to click on the mouse, and it shouldn't do, but every now and again it does. Right. I listen to focus on specific parts of the music, like the cymbal or a guitar. That's right. Went to a ska evening. It's funny enough. You heard the tune that the device over the corner was playing. On Saturday, went to a local club. It's a Polish club, or it used to be, in Amersham, and it's a nice club. But they have DJs and bands and things in, and they had a ska DJ. That's not somebody who's been slashed with a knife, but somebody who likes that music. And who here likes listening to DJs and the loud equipment? Because I find that it's so variable. I mean, I like loud music. I like loud music. I don't like music that's so loud that you can't talk. But I don't like music that's being blasted out so hard that it's distorting. And what we had on that tune that we were just playing he was playing on Saturday, and he had it turned up so high on the input that all you could hear was you could hear the bass, feel the bass. You could actually physically feel the treble cutting its way into your head, because it was totally and utterly clipping on and limiting on the piezo tweeters, because it was a disco set. So the PA system was, it's not exactly hi-fi, but it should produce a good sound. And you couldn't really hear what the guy was singing. And then a little bit later on, because I don't know what source he was using, I guess it was CD, but the next one of the next tracks he played wasn't that loud. I don't like sound so loud; it's distracting. Cinema is bad with that. Yeah. I tell you what, when you go to the cinema and you hear a proper soundtrack though, and they've got it set right, it can sound really good. But yeah, this disco guy, he had it so loud. I mean, there was a band the other week at the same club. I mean, it's not the club's fault. The club just, they just pay people to come in, and the band was in, and the guy, they had a proper sound guy, and he come round and he said to us, is this loud enough for you, or is it too loud, or whatever? And they were playing, and they had the odd bit of feedback. They couldn't help that, but the sound quality was wonderful. We were at a live performance, and the sound sounded live. It didn't sound processed particularly, although they did obviously have fuzz pedals and things, but it actually was. It was there. It was. That's what you were there to listen to, and that's what you heard. And the previous week there was another DJ there, and he had started off. He was doing some holiday hits or something, and we'd got there nice and early, 7:30, and he was just playing background music, and it was nice, very pleasant. His system was good. And then about half an hour later, he started turning it up, and it was okay for the next half an hour. And then after that, it just got to the point where it was just everything was just painful. It's the only thing I can say. Now, talking about pain, my little one, who is not so little anymore, she was in the room when I was doing a sound test on a tape. Now, I'm not going to tell you which tape it is, because you'll have to wait. Kelvin might have a slight idea on one of them. But it's I was doing the playback the way I had it set up, the computer fed the cassette deck in silence, because that's the way I had it set this time. And it was playing, and she was in the room, and I was playing it back, and it was playing it back through the laptop speakers, but fairly quietly. And we got to the frequency sweep, and I think it might have even been the -21. But she was talking to me, and she said, all of a sudden she goes, "Oh, that hurts." And she grimaced, and she was there, and she was having problems. And good, Kelvin, your ears are no longer bleeding. Good. She grimaced, and she then sort of, oh, thank goodness that's over. And then, of course, it went onto the rest of the thing, and it was fine. But the high frequencies that the laptop could produce, I couldn't hear them. But I was impressed that the tape did. And I've had a look at the trace before coming on here tonight. If only the videos were so easy to do that everybody else seems to think they would be. I was having a look at the traces and things tonight, and very impressed indeed. It's from a big manufacturer, and I think, judging by what I've heard so far, it's a tape that if you could get hold of at a good price, it'd be worth buying. Anyway, I'm not telling you any more than that. My laptop speakers are tweeter sized anyway. Yeah. I tell you what I don't understand. I told you I think I told you, I'll see if I can find a picture of one. There's the speakers that we use are right. Well, there's a picture of the TV. It was in the day, it was a really good thing. Pinkfish Media, that's not what I wanted. Who the hell are Pinkfish Media? Right, here we go. I have a picture of it here, if that's the right one. I will bring you up on the screen again, chaps, and anybody else who's watching. It's that one. And cut. Done. Right. This is what the TV I had in the 80s, and it was a lovely set. Cost 600 quid back in 1982, 83, something like that. And it cost, well, if you can see it's got a Betamax C7 underneath it. Let's see if I can make that any bigger. There we go. So that's the TV that I used to have, and that was the one that the neighbour came in and said, "Oh, is that 3D?" Because the picture was so good. Anyway, you see that speaker on the side there? That there is what I use with a Class A thing. And I'll tell you, it's 1.5 cassettes high, and it's about 1 cassette wide, I think. I shall measure it. Hang on. Right. Yeah, it's 1.5 high, and it's 1 cassette wide. Now, we've got some Sony speakers that my wife is using. Oh, I'm back now. We've got some Sony speakers my wife is using in the studio gym, and they are about the same size, but they were cheap and cheerful, plug them in to your Walkman type things, which we bought. Why did we buy them? We were on holiday in Greece, or Greek island. That's not the right one. It must be that one. Yeah, we were on a holiday in a Greek island, and I'm not being rude to the Greeks, but the radio stations are not the most cosmopolitan. They tend to have a lot of music which are balalaikas, lutes, and whatever, I don't know, twangy instruments. And like I say, I'm not being rude. I like the sounds, but not all the time. and we couldn't find, because we were just listening on a little transistor radio, we couldn't find anything that was more international or Western. So what we did was we went out and bought. We're on holiday. What can we do? We'll go out and buy a DVD player and a set of speakers, because we need to be able to hear the DVD player. So we bought one of those portable DVD players, Philips one. It was very, very nice. Cost a bit, but in the days when I had lots of money, well, enough money, should I say. And then we bought these speakers, which are about 2/3 the size of those Profil ones. Now, the Profil speakers go from 100 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and I know they go up to 20 kilohertz because my daughter said, ouch, when I got to 20 kilohertz, coming from the other direction. And so I know they work. But they sound absolutely gorgeous in the same way as the Alexa does. Whoops, said it again. And what I was going to say was, what I don't understand is why they sound that good. I was going to say I used to be, hang on, the large laptop. Andrew Heiser, I was going to say it used to be the consumption of alcohol that made the sound seem distorted or loud later in the night. Now the DJ simulates that effect for you. Yeah. Kelvin says the first sense to go after consumption of alcohol is hearing. I thought it was common, but maybe though. As in common sense, because that's when people start jumping off buildings and things, isn't it? Yeah, sorry, you got me with that one. They sound good because they don't try to play the very low frequencies, in my opinion. I'll tell you what, they don't try and play the very low frequencies. You know, they specified 100, but when you hear that playing, they sound. I mean, obviously I can't simulate it for you. I might try recording it one day and put it on and say, how do these sound like this, and put it as a video, and then people can argue with me. I don't know how it works. I don't know why two speakers in two similar boxes of similar, they are 10 watt rated, I think, 10 watt RMS. The little things are, whatever. But they sound like really cheap, cheerful. They don't even sound like a good transistor radio. But those things, they sound absolutely magnificent in comparison. Now, that's not to say that when I have the sound system or the soundbar on in the living room and that was rumbling away, you couldn't tell the difference, because that was, but then, horses for courses and all that sort of thing. Anyway, it's just a thought. I tend to listen to music, and I tend to listen to the equipment that it's on, and then I tend to listen to the sound quality. I love good sound quality. I love good sound equipment. I would like, when I see, now this, am I unusual in this? If I see a piece of equipment, I think, ooh, I'd love to hear that. Same as if I see a piece of equipment like a TV or something. Oh, I'd love to see that. And I tell you what, if somebody said, "Oh, look, there's a tank, a Sherman tank or whatever over there. Here's the keys." I go, "Oh, I'd love to have a go at that." Maybe I'm just a bit of a goer. But the idea. But when I've heard something and it sounds awful, I don't want anything to do with it. I mean, my wife's taken the pee out of me because we've sat in pubs, and there was a band turned up, and they seemed to insist on trying to make people's ears bleed. That was their sole objective, was to make people's ears bleed. Everything was too loud, everything was distorted. I know guitars, they played the guitars for distortion, but everything was distorted, and it just sounded horrible. And I sat there, I shoved there were kids running around and whatever. And we were no more than 7 or 8 foot away from the speakers, and the room wasn't big enough for the power they put out. But it sounded horrible. And yet I've been to another place where a band, similar sized band, they were playing and they were setting up the sound and everything, and it was absolutely gorgeous, really nice. Loud. You couldn't speak over it, but you could hear and listen to what they were doing. Wonderful. Anyway, what we got on here? Andrew Heiser. I took the Bose SoundLink apart, and they are ingenious. There are two opposing passive radiators used to reproduce the low end. All right. And Steve says, my wife wanted to buy some microsystems for nephews, but anything priced acceptably sounds awful to me. Yeah. Have you ever noticed that I'll tell you something I've discovered. And I discovered this when I actually had time to fiddle about rather than work or whatever. But if your stereo system sounds bad and you think, oh, I wonder what's wrong with that. Obviously, you've got to check the stylus if you're playing a record. But if you've got this, it doesn't show that. It doesn't show that on my 3 monitors. It's got slightly different pictures on them. Yeah. Anyway, if your stereo system sounds a bit off one day, and you're playing something that you played previously, other than a CD, well, obviously, check the heads on a tape deck. Check for fluff. Oh, fluff on your stylus really ruins it. It doesn't ruin the stylus, it just ruins the sound quality. And you look at a record that isn't particularly fluffy, you play it, and the stylus picks up the fluff. You play the next record, it sounds awful, but it still doesn't look fluffy. And then you pick up and you look and you see that your stylus has got loads of fluff around the top. So it's worth having a stylus brush. It's just a thought. Anyway, having done those precautions, or if you're playing CD and you know there's nothing wrong with the CD player, and it sounds a bit off, go and have yourself a big drink. Because if your body systems aren't working correctly, you can't hear things properly. For instance, if you're dehydrated, your ears and everything will stiffen up, so they won't hear the lovely sounds. You might hear it differently, or you just won't get that sparkle. I'm listening to this on early 90s Yamaha microsystem. Aha. The 90s microsystem sounded okay, or good compared to what we've got now. Yeah, I've always found that I'm amazed how good Bluetooth speakers are. The little ones. Like I said, I've got the thing that looks like a jet engine. How do they get those to have good sound? I mean, if you hear, I'm going back to the 1960s, early 60s, when nobody had, not in the UK anyway. American listeners can gloat at this point. We didn't have stereo systems in the UK in the 1960s, the early 1960s. The majority of the British public didn't know what stereo was until the 70s. And having had to explain it to a few people, no, it's not the high stuff out of one side and the low stuff out of the other, etc., etc. When the FM radio went stereo, then people started wondering about it. But have you noticed they don't sell stereo now? They just sell things. They just sell stuff, and it may or may not come with 2 speakers. And if it does, it may or may not be stereo, which is really weird. But that's because that's to the common people rather than to audiophiles or even hi-fi enthusiasts. But the sounds in those days were boxy, and the norm was sealed. Most people had sealed speakers. They did not have bass vents and stuff. They just had the speaker in a box. It was all sealed up, and inside there was some sort of foam and stuff to stop the box resonating. Oh, we've got Stephen says 5. Yes, you would think a system with proper speakers would sound at least as good as a Bluetooth thing. Exactly. Infinite Baffle. That's the one. Then they went on to ported, because they realised that people... I remember my dad getting a 25 watt per channel stereo and how pleased he was with that. Saying, but really, with the Infinite Baffle speaker system, you've only got 50% efficiency, blah, 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 and you've got to be, you need so many watts per square foot and all this sort of thing. And, of course, he was right. But then they started doing this stuff with the bass they got the crossovers better. They managed to port the bass, and so the speakers got it better. I mean, I've got upstairs my stereo system now. I've got speakers that are they're Missions, I think, and they're about that big. They sound lovely, and I mean they're not. They are ported. Basically, they've got proper ports on them, and they sound very nice. And they run. I think they're rated at 100 watts. I've got some other speakers that were three times that size, but they were only rated at 25, 30 watts, and they did sound boxy. They were nice. I mean, you get something like that. That Anker Soundcore. We sold. My wife and I mentioned it to a couple of people at a convention. It was a harmonica convention, as it happens, and the people. Well, we didn't really mention it. She got it out because they were trying to do. It was like a convention, yeah. So the venue had equipment that was meant to be set up so they could amplify and whatever. And she went into this conference room, and the bloke was pulling his hair out trying to get this thing to work because it wouldn't work. Something didn't connect. So she said, "Oh, I've got this," and she pulled it out of her handbag, because you never know what women have got in their handbags. And she pulled out this Anker Soundcore and coupled it up, and the bloke was blown away. I think the next time we saw the people, they said 10 people had bought those Soundcores because of the fact that they were so good for what they were using them for. I mean, they weren't going to. They did fill an average size room, but they weren't going to. But for what they wanted, they were small and sounded good, and it's amazing. Now on normal speakers, you're talking about 98 dB W, and so they've got so much more efficiency now. Haven't really managed to get my head around that part, Kelvin. It doesn't matter what the wattage of a speaker can handle. Sensitivity is the key to quality. Yes, and I have Mission. Yeah, Mission. That's the one I got. Yes, sensitivity is the key to quality. And what you've got to do. There was a very interesting article I read or heard. I think actually it might have been PS Audio again, and he was explaining how you get the sensitivity of the bass speaker, you get the sensitivity of the tweeter, and you get the sensitivity of the mid-range, and you then have to work out the crossovers so that they complement each other, and that's how you do it. And he was explaining that three-way speakers are a lot more complicated to set up for them than two-way speakers, because two-way just one drops off and the other one picks up. But it does come down to that. And the sensitivity thing is Kelvin's using Mission as well. Right, good. The sensitivity thing is obviously down to if you've got a bass speaker that produces lovely bass sound, but you've got to then bring down the sensitivity of the tweeter so that it's not screaming whilst the bass is doing its woofing. You need to have everything balanced. And I've done some research on speakers, and it's quite interesting looking at the manufacturers' patterns that they do. They make mine look amateurish, but then mine comes out of Audacity. But yeah, you can see where the crossovers and things are. It's very, very good. If you want to go back to that thing about stereo, one of the things that people don't understand about, the CD player that is literally slightly bigger than a CD. That's a CD. No, it's not. That's a CD. That's invisible. Those ones you get. They're basically a tile, and they've got a speaker there and a speaker there. And I've seen many people say, "What's the point of putting stereo speakers on these things?" And if you go and listen to my video on doing why they do it, you'll find that it's very important, because if you've got stereo signal and you mix it together, you end up with less than you started with. If you've got mono signals and you mix them together, you end up with more than you started with. But if you've got stereo signals, you end up with less than you started with. If you saw the thing about where I digitalised the. I know Stephen did, where I digitalised the 78s originally, and you start off with, funnily enough, you start off with 2 mono tracks, which are not exactly the same, and when you add them together, it makes so much more sense to the ears. It's actually quite good. If you ever get the chance to do, I mean, we're talking playing here. If you just get a record player with a stereo cartridge, play a 78 on it. Doesn't matter whether you do it at the right speed or the wrong speed. Take the stereo signal out and listen to it with headphones. You could do it on Audacity if you want to get it to the right speed or something, if you haven't got a 78 turntable. And you will hear, with the headphones, you will hear a mono sound. But it won't be true mono, because obviously the thing's rattling around in the slot. And then then when you monolose it, when you make it a mono, it will all of a sudden, you will hear it as being pure mono, and it will sound so much nicer than the stereo mono was. But that's not to say there's anything wrong with stereo, because obviously when you're playing an LP with an LP stylus, it's not rattling around, and also the whole things are intended to work that way. And so they should be, when you monetize, sounds like what you do with YouTube, doesn't it? I've monetized it. Anyway, when you make it mono, the end result is actually slightly muffled in comparison to the stereo. So it's interesting that, because when you mono the stereo, when you mono the mono, it becomes more clear and more precise. When you mono the stereo, it becomes slightly less precise and slightly less clear. It's one of the wonders of audio, and it's one of the things people don't understand. We've got a problem with I was talking about the lovely speakers on our telly. They're in place of a soundbar. Didn't have a soundbar, did have the speakers, and the amplifier I've got, the gain control is a little bit iffy, and every now and again I have to give it a good sort of backwards and forwards, and so you can lose a channel on it. And funnily enough, if you don't hear it go, you wouldn't know it's not there, because it doesn't add to the volume, it just adds to the sound stage. Strange that, isn't it? Let me see what we got on here now. Andrew, I love how the missions are internally upside down. Woofer at the top. Oh yes. And Kelvin says British manufacturers tend to have a particular sound which I find pleasing. My best cassette deck is mostly British. Yeah. There's been some interesting discussions I've seen on that, about why the Americans like bass and why the British don't to the same extent, and various things. There are certainly some cultural differences, but I'm slightly of the opinion that the reason that we don't go for bass over here is because we live in small rooms, and if you turn the bass up, everybody hears it, so they tend to not worry about it so much. The brick versus wooden houses, yeah, or people in glass houses shouldn't what? Do anything. You shouldn't live in a glass house. Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. I know I said the other day, I've never turned my stereo system up more than 3/4 of the way with the surround sound on, ever, except for once, and that was when I first got it, just to see if it would, and it did, and the wall shook, and it's never been that loud since. At the time, the speakers weren't particularly that well tuned to it anyway. But, yeah, 500 watts of the house shaking. Quite interesting. The other thing about... Oh, it's 9:10. It must be... What's the time on there? 21:07, yeah. The whole thing about sound quality... If you go back to the old, there was a thing that Recordology did the other day, which was he reckoned it was the nicest sounding old vintage record player he'd got, and it was a Philips one. Now, I sort of not... Oh, hello, Wasim. Disturbing the house spiders. Yes, yes. I'm not a great fan of... I'll tell you what I'm not a great fan of. I wouldn't buy necessarily a Philips TV, says I with a Philips TV over there, but it's not been made in the Philips factory. And I wouldn't buy a Philips video recorder. And but I'm happy to buy any of the Japanese ones, except I think it was Hinari. The ones that the company that made them for Amstrad and for all the own brands that I wasn't interested in those. They were crap. So the really cheap ones were no good. But all the proper ones, the Hitachis and the stuff like that, Hitachi, Sanyo, Fisher, Sony, they all made good stuff. Even the cheap stuff was good. Gold Star, yeah, they were all right. Samsung were okay as well. But if anything that had an own brand on it, like Seisho or any of the Dixon stuff, they were all made by the same company as was the when you could buy a video recorder for £200, and I used to charge £200 to replace the video heads on a decent video recorder. That shows you how things changed. Yeah, what I was going to say about the old Philips TVs, they used to have smashing pictures on them, and they used to go wrong a lot. The new stuff isn't made in the same way, so I'm not judging that. And I'm not criticising them and saying that they don't do good stuff now. What I'm saying is that when I was dealing with TVs, one of the things that used to happen was you'd get a phone call when you got back from... it'd be about starting in about 2 weeks' time. About 3 weeks into the summer holiday season, you'd start getting phone calls from people saying they've just got back from holiday and their Philips TV doesn't work. And so you'd go around there and they say, well, what's wrong with it? And they say, it won't tune in. And the reason was simple. They had a battery. They had a battery in the tuner. It was only a NiCad battery. It wasn't even a NiMUF. It was a NiCad. And it's about the size of the end of your little finger. And those batteries, it wasn't quite... in fact, I've still got one in my toolbox. It was about like a third of an AA battery. They were there to keep the memory on the tuner. But if the tuner didn't have a memory, it couldn't tune. So it had to have a battery in there. You couldn't even do without it, and it's just except that you'd have to retune it every time. It had to have a battery in it. And those batteries were, I think at the time, and I'm talking 30 years ago now, they were about £6 or £7 each. So that wasn't cheap. And of course the call out fee for somebody in my position was about 25 quid. So you're looking at 30 quid to replace a battery in a television which didn't need to have been made that way, but Philips did it that way. You didn't have the same problem in the Fergusons, you didn't have it in any of the Japanese brands. It was only the Philips that had that battery. And I asked him once what it was there for, and he says, well, we've got to have something to do, I think was the flippant comment from the Philips service department. In the 70s and 80s, were Philips one of the top 2 TV brands in terms of sales? Probably, because they were European. They were cheaper than the Japanese, but they weren't cheap. And they did, the Philips they were leaders. We did actually have a Philips 16:9 TV. It cost £2,500. We rented it. It was a 16:9 TV when 16:9 TVs weren't normal, and it had special facilities to be able to do the pan and scan and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Since we had a big Philips factory close by, so probably biggest seller. Yeah, one of the things that people don't realise is that the EU, bless it, and I wish we were still in it, but that's just me. The EU actually had a thing where, because electronics, they had tariffs on stuff coming in from abroad, and before anybody gets on the Brexit bandwagon about that. If you go back to before we were in the EU properly, we had the same thing, which is why the original colour TVs in the UK were not Japanese. They actually had big tariffs on the Japanese sets coming in. That's why they only bought in 13-inch ones when colour first came out, and they eventually lifted the tariffs, and the 18-inch ones came in, and then so it's all been a bit like that. Andrew says my parents' first colour TV was a GEC TV. Yeah, they were okay. I mean, they were all PAL TVs, and they all had everything you needed in them. It was just the reliability was the problem. The actual pictures on them were okay. The flat squares were the best pictures that we ended up with, other than the Trinitrons. Trinitrons were head and shoulders above the rest. They did a lot to try and copy the Trinitron, but Sony were clever with the patents. They couldn't actually copy what Sony did. They did an impression of what Sony did, because Sony had a single gun with the 3 colours on it, and what the others had. So originally you had 3 guns, if you think red, blue, green, like that, which fired the colours at the screen. And then what Sony did was they said, well, instead of having 3 guns like that, let's have, and then you have to get the scale. So those were 3 big guns. Now, what they did was they said, well, let's have 1 gun, and we'll put the 3 like that. So you got your 3 colours, like that, all in 1 gun. But what the other companies did was they stuck 3 guns side by side by side. Side by side, yeah, that's right. So 3 guns side by side by side. Instead of 1 gun with 3 emitters, they had 3 guns, and they went for the slot shadow masks, and it did actually give it gave them a lot of the advantages that the Sony had, but not everything. It was probably about 85% as good as the Sony. So the Sony, one of the best things about it was the convergence didn't need adjusting all the time. You set it up, but it didn't drift, because once you set it up, if one drifted, they all drifted. So you didn't get all the colorized. You see that on the CD on the behind me, the rainbow effect. You used to get that a lot with the original colour TVs because of the way they worked. 32-inch Sony widescreen. That was a gorgeous telly then, and yes, my last CRT, my profile, which I showed you a picture of earlier on, which was like that, I replaced that with a JVC high definition SVHS TV. There's a thing to get your head around. It had the ability to fully resolve SVHS at full resolution, 450 lines instead of 220. That's picture lines, not scan lines. And the last one we had after that ended up with was the Philips I was telling you about, which was nice, but that cost a lot of money. That was an arm and a leg to rent it. And then we went to what we've now got is, well, we had a Panasonic plasma, real plasma, and now I've still got a Samsung real plasma, but it was the 3D one, and we haven't used the 3D for years. It was gorgeous when it was working, but haven't bothered with it since. It's a shame, really. But yeah, I mean, they were gorgeous, those 32-inch Sonys, really nice. They managed to get an awful lot. If you ever were in the TV industry at the time, you'd have found that in most TV studios they all had a Sony, and what they often had was they had a Sony 18-inch, the one with the renown of KV1800 UB. They normally had them in a box, and the reason they had them was because they were a non-PAL telly. They actually took the signal in, turned it upside down, turned it into a version of NTSC, and displayed that. And the reason they used those in TV studios a lot was because if they plugged a camera feed into it, it would tell it. They could see instantly whether the camera was set up correctly, because it would show the errors. Yeah, just a little bit of trivia for you. Right. TVs I've always found to be really interesting as a kid, but that's because I like optics. My wife gets annoyed with me occasionally because I'll say something, she'll say something, and then I'll prove to her that additive colours are different to, because she's into art. She can draw, she can paint, she can do all sorts of things like that, and she can think of something and draw it, and it'll look like it. And her knitting is absolutely amazing, because she can knit, which is a mechanical thing, but then she can put the artistic touches on, which make it really look special. But if you've ever played with colour TV cameras, you know a little bit about colour. Anyway, what have we got here? Sony monitors. Sony always made the best professional monitors. Yes, they did. And their semi-pro stuff was pretty damn good as well. But they were so heavy, though. Wasim says, mine's a Panasonic 32-inch widescreen CRT. Last few years. Oh, yes, we had one of those. Gave it to my daughter. She didn't realise we paid £1,500 for that. £1,500 for a 32-inch Panasonic widescreen. Weren't they gorgeous? Did you have the ability to plug the SD card in the front and things? We did. I've still got... Yeah, you got... So Wasim says he's now got an LG 47 LCD. Has been going for 10 years now. The beauty of the old Panasonics, my son, when I had my Panasonic, which we replaced because we stopped hiring the Philips and we bought the Panasonic. When it was fun getting that in the house. My son first got into HD TV well before I did, because being a youngster, plenty of spare money. He was getting into these HD TVs, and he was buying the first of them. I can't remember which one they were exactly, but they were awful. I think one of them was a Sanyo, because they were LCD or LED panels, and so they might have had the definition, but they didn't have the contrast ratios and things, and so they were pretty naff. And he came round and saw my standard Panasonic 32-inch showing something that he'd been watching on his, and that's a shame. It was a heavy mission to skip it when it finally died. Very heavy, yeah. I had the problem that it was delivered and they left it on the lawn, and there was just me in the house. So how do I get the thing in? Well, I had to go and knock on one of the next door neighbours. Excuse me, mate, could you help me bring my telly in? Which was fun. What's the Steve? Still rocking my Samsung 42-inch LCD with 3D glasses that we never used. Yeah, right. Mine's a 42-inch, I think, but I went for the not the LCD, but went for the plasma. What's the Panasonic CRT? Andrew Hyde says, I think the professional Sony 1080i HD CRT was about £10,000. I wouldn't be surprised. Wasim says he never got into 3D. I actually got into 3D for the simple reason that it was gorgeous. But you had the problem that they used infrared coupling to the shutter glasses, and trying to get the material to watch was difficult and expensive. What I didn't understand was if they were pressing DVDs, they were pressing DVDs anyway, and so they would press a Blu-ray that was in. It was exactly the same disc. They'd press it in 3D and then they'd press it in 2D. You could play the 3D ones in 2D, it didn't matter, but why did they charge you an extra 50% for them? Yeah, £10,000. You should have seen the price. When I was working for Portal Prompt, which was a prompting company, AutoCue type company, we had a Link 110 camera come in, which was being used on a Telecine. If you don't know what Telecine is, there's a clue in the title. It was basically a full, the big TV cameras you see on the pods and things. It was a full one of those, so it was huge, ginormous. It was the sort of thing you see at the beginning of the grandstand in the old days, and that was mounted on an aluminium eye bar, and the guy, what he did was he had two projectors, so literally you ran the film in the projector and the TV saw it, and he used what they called anyway, I forget the term now, but effectively it didn't have a screen, but it had a prism, so he projected onto the prism did something, and then it became the correct focal length. So effectively the camera was looking at the shutter of the projector, and they had the ability to switch between the two projectors. It was not sophisticated, but it was relatively cheap. I say relatively cheap. I asked them one day, this was in 1987-ish, and I said to him, so how much does that camera, how much is the system? And he told me. And it was a lot of money because it's a professional grade projector, and it was a lot of money because it was another professional grade, and I think it had a slide function on it as well. And then I said, so what about the camera? He reckoned that the cameras were, in 1987, they were something like, I think it's 20,000 quid for the tubes. I could be wrong. It might have been 2,500 quid for the tubes. Whatever it was, there were three of them. They were proper professional grade. You would find the same cameras in the BBC. It was only SD, and they were thousands of pounds each tube. And there might have been four actually, one for each colour and one for luminance. And that's the sort of money that things were. So £10,000 for a monitor isn't a lot of money. Andrew says Sony HD Cam SR VTR were £80,000 when they launched. Yep, and lovely format of the machine, though I used to use one daily. Yeah, well, this is £80,000. I went to one of the broadcast IBC. Went all the way to Switzerland with the company because we were doing these telecines and things, and it was when, it shows you how old it was. They just launched the digital processing for digital effects. If you ever watch an old 1980s Top of the Pops, you'll find that they used to use. We actually sold them the device to do it. They used to have like a diamond, a bug eye effect. So it used to rotate, so the picture would be going round and round and round. And so the centre was, what it was a disc, and they'd cut facets into it. So the very centre you could see straight through, but you had these facets cut around, just like a diamond. If you look at a diamond that's been put in a diamond ring, and they were mounted on a small little box on the front of the camera, and so they put the disc in. They'd have this switch, and you'd switch it on, and this thing would go round and round like the Magic Roundabout. And as it did so, it would take the. They also did starburst filters and various other stuff. So when they wanted to, the cameraman, when he was there, he would have to, between shots, he'd run around the front, pull out the faceted disc, put in the starburst disc, or take it out and either run the disc rotator or not. You wouldn't believe how in the 80s how crude but workable things were. Did you know, for instance, if you look at an old 1980s TV show, when the credits come up, if you look at it, what they were printed on a roll of paper, and they were, if you think of like those, like an old bus destination blind, where you have two rollers, one at the top, one at the bottom, and you turn a handle, and the paper, the destination rolls up and down. Now, think of that reduced slightly and with an electric motor on it. And now you've got what they had in the TV studios. You had literally two rollers and the paper, and they had to print the titles and the credits onto the paper, and then they would do either chroma key or colour displacement technology, whichever words you want to use, and they would literally push the button and the paper would come up and just in front of the camera, and either it was black with white text or it was coloured. If it was coloured, then they would do the the words were in front of what was happening. And if you look at the old stuff, BBC and things from that era, you'll see that quite often you can see a little wobble to the text, and that's as the paper was moving. Yeah, CSO, colour separation overlay, that's the one. I know, well, it's basically green screen, but yeah, that's what they used to do. There's if you look on YouTube, there's some Blue Peter stuff where they were introducing colour separation overlay, and John Noakes is getting himself in a mess with it. It's quite amusing to watch. Yeah, the colour separation overlay. I can remember, if you've watched stuff from that time, you know how good. Well, you can see the green screen behind me. Well, you can't see the green screen, but you know there's a green screen behind me. You can see my chair sort of coming in and going out. To have got it that good in the 80s, they spent so much money, and I can't remember what the machine was called. Andrew, you might know. It was Quantel, and they did the first digital processing, and I can't remember what the machine was called, but it was a simple thing. I saw the launch of that in Switzerland when they were first doing it, and they were advertising it as digital effects with optical quality. Yes, Box of Delight, good example. Yes, it was all good fun. I remember them. There was I went on a stand and they had a really nice model railway, and you sort of think, well, hang on, this is TV exhibition. What have we got this for? And then you'd see, if you looked at the monitors, they had this really expensive train set, and they had these cameras. They had what were called news gathering cameras and studio cameras, and so what was it EN? I'm sure Andrew knows the initials they used for them, but the whole point was that they had this train going round and round, and they were doing close-up shots and various other stuff. And when you looked at it, you couldn't believe how realistic the train was and the vehicles and stuff on the screen. If you didn't know better, you would have thought that they were real life. It was absolutely, 40 years on, I'm talking about it now, so it shows you how good a display it was. Or maybe it was just because I was starstruck by it, I don't know. I loved going and seeing all that stuff, though. CVI, computer video instrumentation was very... It could layer and shape video, yeah. I remember, if you wanted to see anything that was... Talking about hi-fi, if you wanted to see anything that was new to what could be done with video, if you watched Top of the Pops, they got all the stuff first. They got all the toys first. So they got... Was it called DICE? Digital Integrated. And then... Does anybody remember Soap, the comedy programme? Used to be on ITV, 10:30 on a Friday. Do do dee dee do do dee do 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 dee do 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 dee do do. I think it was one of the first programmes they transmitted over here from the American videotape, or if it wasn't from the videotape, it was from a cine telly, not a telly-cine, but from a cine telly of the American videotape. It was absolutely smashing programme, absolutely awful pitch quality. It's just one of those things. I'm going to have another slurp. Right, yeah, okay. Should we do a quick roundup of what's been on the other channels? I was just looking at see, there's another Techmoans did one. I can't remember what it was about, so I shall have a look. Do 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 do. Techmoan, where are you? Yeah. It was quite an interesting one, I believe that. I think. Here we go. Techmoan. What did he do? His videos were... Oh yes, it was the 3D VHD. Talking about 3D. That was quite interesting. And if you haven't seen it, it's well worth having a watch. Mind you, he's got 265 viewers per hour on that one, so you have to get in the queue possibly. But yeah, that was well worth watching. What did Westlife do this week? Oh yeah, this was good. The Power of Wood Grain he's got on the thumbnail, but it was about AMF, the Paragon Night Owl TV timer, which is interesting. It's one of those weird things you sort of think, well, why? And he goes into it. So yeah, it's well worth it's not a very long one. It's only 8 minutes and 2 seconds. And let me see what's Recordology done this week. Recordology top 3 turntable deals on Amazon Prime Day. Well, that was yeah, okay. And the one audio monitor unboxing of the headphones, that was quite good. I tell you what I did find enjoyable though was he did the Retrolife turntable. It's about $126. Don't know if we can get it in the UK, but it looked quite good for the money. It's got a proper cartridge in it. It's got a 3600 cartridge in it, and coming back to, if I go to my channel, we'll see what was causing ear bleeding for certain people. Well, as you know, I did the one on CRS2 Basf chrome tape, and the fact that you can record it on a Japanese deck. A little story for you there. I put that video onto the JVC sort of appreciation Facebook group, and it went up for about a day, and then the admins noticed it and they bounced it, and I got this. I clicked on the feedback thing, and it said that the problem was that it was not a it was not a JVC piece of equipment, and they only accept posts for JVC equipment. So I put on it that this is a TIAC, which is Japanese. JVC is Japanese, and do you think something along the lines of, do you think it's fair that people should think wrongly of these tapes? If a TIAC can do it, I'm sure a JVC can. And so I sent that back, and that stayed up. So they obviously saw the point of that, because obviously I'm not trying to push the TIAC as such. You know, if you got one, you got one. If you haven't, you haven't. But what I was trying to do was dispel the myth about BASF tapes not recording on there. And as a point of interest, the tape I'm currently doing, which is not a BASF and is not, it's not even a Type 2, but it actually has slightly more problems with the levels than the BASFs do. But it's not a problem, and if you see the video, you'll know why when it comes out. That's the other thing, was the 1 dB clipping. That was let me see. I'll go, if I do that, you can see what I'm on about. There we go. Right, so you got your BASF there, and then you got your 1 dB clipping. Now that was an interesting one, because that was I had to debate, and I obviously got it wrong, because I recorded my own voice at my normal level, and then I put the tones on at the real level that they came out at, and yeah, that was a mistake. But it does actually prove what's what, so it's well worth doing. It's well worth having a listen on that one. And this other one, Unlock the Secrets, and that was quite good as well. I can't remember what that one's about now. Oh yeah, what do the switches do? And you get people asking, well, if I record my my Type 1 on CR02 settings, etc., will that be better? Well, watch the video and you find out. That's all I can say on there. Anyway, let's turn that off there and turn that. No, hang on. That's me. Cut back to me. Boom. There we go. Right. Okay. That should be on there now. What have we got on here, Andrew? ADAC conversions you mentioned has clean cut. That's why it looked smeary. Yeah. And Steve says the turntable looked very good for the money. Yep. Andrew Hyde says so. Scene changes had crossfading, not clean edits. That's right. And Stephen says I found this channel as I was researching the W1200. If I didn't find the Yamaha for €50, I'd have gotten the TIAC. Well, absolutely. Stephen also says, what does EQ do exactly? And then he says, I don't understand why it's about time. Okay, well that's a good question there. Right, EQ. I could bring up my picture, couldn't I? Let me see if I can. No, I've shut that down. Right, what EQ is? Equalization. If you turn up the treble on a where have I gone? No, I'm back. If you turn up the treble on a playback, you hear the treble goes high or low if you turn it down. If you turn the bass up, you get more bass, or you turn it down. Now, if you remember my... I'll do it on here. Look, here we go. Bear with, I shall cut to something and then I'll bring it up so you can see what's occurring. Right, that's me. And I'll give it to you. There you go. Like it or lump it, you're stuck with it now. Right, get rid of that. Oh, there's my friendly lion again. I love that lion. I'm going to save that one. Right, okay, let's open up this. Why does it always want to do that? No, recover selected. Okay. Okay, right. Audacity. Right, if I open up Audacity and do a new, like that, and then I say, okay, let's go for, I'll just generate something. I just want a line, really. So that's me, it's picking up me, and that's all right, it can do that. And if I go, whoa, and then I go, ee, it'll do something. Anyway, I'm only doing that purely for the purposes of the demonstration. No, it's okay. So that's that. And if we then bring up the effects on here, and we look at it, and it says we have EQ and filters. Now, if I bring up the graphic EQ, so it's got the word EQ in it, or the letters EQ, and it says select it first, which I always forget to select it first, but there we go. If we do that, there we go, EQ and filters, graphic, right. Now, don't know what that was for. Oh yeah, I was playing with something. I managed to make something sound like it was a CB radio by doing that. Anyway, let's do flatten. Boom. Right. So there's your graph of your normal sounds. And if I apply that, if I apply that to there, you will see nothing happen probably. So let's do apply. And I was right, absolutely nothing happened. But if I do the same thing, EQ and filters, graphic. If I do the same thing and I go on to this one, which I happen to know is there, RIAA, what that's going to do is it's going to give you more treble, more bass and less treble. So if I hit apply, it's going to do that. Now you can see that's changed. Now, obviously that's had an effect. And if I now reverse that effect by taking it off, let's just undo the graphic, it goes back to that. So if we played that, it would, I mean, I'm not going to because it's just me making silly noises because I needed something to be on there. But if I do the opposite of that, generate, no, hang on, EQ and filters, pardon me, graphic. If I invert that and then we apply that, look what we get now. So that's made it all much smaller and fluffier. Okay, so what we know now is that if we do EQ, things change. Let me just show you this. If we start off at flat and we go for effect, EQ, and we go for graphic EQ, and we do RIAA. So we'll bring it down as brand new, fresh, and factory preset, RIAA. So that's it going to be. So what I apply to that now will do that. And it comes up like that. Now, last time I turned it on, I just undid it to make it back to normal. But what I can do here is I can EQ and filters, graphic, invert. If I apply the invert, so I'm not taking away what we'd already put on there, I'm adding the opposite, we end up back where we started from. And that's what EQ is in simple terms. What they do on records is they boost the bass, and when they record the record, they cut the bass right down and they boost the treble. Then when you play it back, they boost the bass and they cut the treble. And that has the effect of giving you bass that you need, but bass has always been just wobbly, 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 boomy sounds. So you don't need any definition in them. But the treble, which they boosted really high, scratches a treble. When you apply the opposite to the RIAA on it, it cuts down the treble, and so the scratches are cut down. But because you boosted the sounds you wanted, they come down to being the normal level. So the scratches are at less than normal level by at least 20 dB when you look at that curve. Let me just bring it up again. So when you bring up that and you look at the graphic, so when you apply the RIAA in the first place, like that, boom, you can see that the treble is being cut by 20 kilohertz by 20 dB. So that's why the scratches are less, but the sound is good, because when they record it like that. And that's exactly what they do. And that's why it's called EQ. Now, when you're talking about tape decks, what they do with tape decks is much the same, really. They boost bits up, and then when you're talking about the EQ on a turntable, not a turntable, on a cassette deck, you've got your 120 microseconds and you've got your 70 microseconds. What that is a very confusing way of saying, and I can't reproduce it here to any scale that would mean anything particularly, but if that was, we'll say 120 microseconds, right? Obviously you'd invert that on playback. But if that's 120 microseconds, then I'll probably get this wrong. 70 microseconds would be possibly later starting. I mean, there is actually a way of working it out, but I don't have it to hand. But probably later starting, and possibly slightly higher there. So when you play it back, the reason that you want to have the same playback as the recording is because obviously if that's the recording, that's the playback, or vice versa, or whatever. If they don't quite match, then you're going to get slightly different results. But the reason why it's not a major issue is because if people can play Dolby, oh look, see that changed. if people can play Dolby tapes with the Dolby encoding not being active because they like the lift on the treble, the difference between 120 microseconds and the 70 microseconds is merely, you can alter it with your tone controls and you'll get it close enough, is near enough, a darn sight closer than somebody who's playing about with Dolby and playing back Dolby tapes without putting the Dolby on, because it's not that accurate. And when it comes down to it, and this is me being matter of fact rather than purist, when it comes down to it, you're never going to get exactly the same sound. Every time you listen to the thing, you're going to have a different sound quality. Every time you, because of what we just said earlier on about, you need a drink, your ears aren't the same. You've had a hard day, you're tired, you can't hear things. Your speakers aren't warm, aren't cold, aren't dry, aren't wet. Humidity in the room or whatever. By dry and wet, I mean, not pouring water over them. But all of those things are going to affect the way the thing sounds. So whether or not you play a Type 2 tape back with a Type 1 setting or not isn't going to make any difference. And the thing that people get really, really, really upset about is the playing back. They get really confused about the music cassettes that have been recorded, on Type 2 tape or Chrome tape. They don't call it Type 2 tape, but they have to be played back in the Type 1 setting, the auto select decks. They don't have the grooves cut in them. And you see people sort of, how do I get it to play back with the Type 2 settings? It's a Type 2 tape, blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't really matter, because, for the simple reason that it was recorded with the 120 microsecond system, and it was played back. It should be played back with 120 microsecond. The fact that it's a Chrome tape doesn't mean that it's going to sound any worse because you're playing it back with the same setting as it was recorded with. And the fact that it was recorded at that setting is purely down. If you do some research, it's doing my back now. Yeah, if you do some research, you'll find that reel-to-reel recorders, they had about 6 or 7 different standards. I think they've still got several. Let's see what's so. Andrew High says BASF discussion interested. They introduced Chrome type for duplication, 70 microsecond EQ for record, but the playback at 120 EQ. I have a number of pre-recorded tapes like that. Yes, play them back at Type 1. If you've got the switches, play them back at Type 1 settings, because they were recorded that way. The reason was that if you, I was going on to that. Steve says, okay, so it's an equalizer curve for the high frequencies, but nothing complicated. No, it's nothing complicated. Andrew says, as long as the correct bias current is used when recording it, that's the point. What you're trying to do when you record a tape is you're trying to get the signals onto the tape. As we said about with the styluses and things, tape has a natural hiss. And if you go on to some of the reel-to-reel information, you'll find that they had about 4 or 5 different equalizations. You had American, you had European, you had UK, and then you had Uncle Tom Cobley's and all. And they started to standardize on them. The Japanese had a problem that they were making decks that were not using the same, not bias, but we're not using the same EQ as the European decks, and not using the same EQ as the American decks, and the American decks and the UK decks and the European decks didn't all. So if you've got a tape sent over from the States and you tried playing it, yeah, exactly, Andrew. If you tried playing it on a UK machine, it might sound okay or it might not, but you could compensate for it. But they eventually knew what knobs to twiddle to get it to sound right, but you never got it exactly right because it was recorded with a different EQ. So they then started standardizing it, and then so that's why you've got the IEC and the NAB standards, as Andrew says. They had to do something to make it work, but because it was, the argument about PAL, CCAM and NTSC, I go back to that because people have this thing where, PAL's great, NTSC is wonderful, CCAM's difficult, whatever, and they were all very good, and they all did what they did very well, but they weren't compatible with each other. You could not shove NTSC up a PAL TV. Originally you wouldn't even get a line lock, let alone colour. You couldn't put it up a CCAM one because you wouldn't get anything either. But you could put PAL into a CCAM set and you'd get line lock. You could put CCAM into a PAL set, you'd get line lock. So you'd get a picture, but it'd be in black and white. That's what standards do, you see, and that's where there's a problem when they don't match. But what they did with the tapes was they made them. You did get line lock, if you like. You did get colour. It just wasn't quite right, and so it was the not quite right was the bit. So when they started doing the cassette stuff, you had the Americans were being, this is the way we do it. And the English were saying, no, this is the way we do it, it's best this way. And the Europeans were saying, well, no, we're doing it this way, it's best this way. And everybody's way was best. And they all had pros and cons. None of them was any much better than the other. So what they did was they came to a compromise, which was all based on roughly, it worked about. And then I think they end up with 2 switches. They actually do have 2 switches on the proper stuff, just to get it absolutely right. But that's how the standards and things were generated. So the IEC NAB standards are good. So that's why if you watch my video on the mud sounding thing, I'm talking about the fact that it's an IEC2 tape. Now, if you look at the things I had here earlier on, which are those ones? No, these ones. This one, TDK CDing 2, and if you, they've got labels on these ones, but if you look at the CDing 2, it says on, let's see, will it come out? It says on there, where my finger is, it says position chrome. And just above that, it says IEC 2. And that's because it's an IEC Type 2 bias setting, which means that they need to have a bias of so many nanowebbers, whatever thingy bobbers, which is 150% more than on ferric. Which is why you can't record on a Type 1 tape on a Type 2 setting and get a good result. It will record, but it won't sound right, and it's all down to that, really. So with the reel-to-reels, it was very much a case of trying to appease the egos. There probably is an ideal optimal setting, but nobody had come up with it or a good reason why it was, so they stuck with the 2. But with the cassettes, they just went with, this is IEC Type 2, and you're going to have this setting. But they had, partly why you had the time difference, the 120 to 70, was because marketing. Why would you sell? The tapes were very expensive, and why would you buy one if all it did was sounded a little bit better? I mean, people used to watch VHS LP and Super LP because they weren't that fussed about the quality. So why would you make it that the tapes were more expensive, and why would you make it that it was harder to play back and things? If all it is it just sounds a little bit better. So they said, well, if we're going to make it better, we've got to make it as good as we can. So they went for the 70 microseconds. And also we had to make it different to standard so that people can, when you put all of it together, you get as good as you can get, and if you don't put it all together, you don't. Well, that's fine. That's marketing. It's like the biasing thing, the ability to alter the bias. Yes, it makes a difference. But if you go onto my video about levels, about the minus 6 dB, you can't hear 6 dB of level change. You can hear when it changes, but you can't hear that it's changed. So therefore, our hearing is not as precise as what these measurements would, or these standards would suggest. And so therefore, the difference between 70 milliseconds and 108 milliseconds, you wouldn't be able to hear the difference. If you didn't hear the first one, you wouldn't be able to hear that the second one was different. You'd just hear it as being okay. and that's why they had to do it. So they fine-tuned it, and they've done it with the, when you alter, certainly on the machines that I've got, when you alter the bias control, it makes a difference of sort of 1 or 2 dB to the actual signal. But because they've scaled it such that it looks a big difference, got to get that in. And I'm not saying there's a problem with fine-tuning the bias. What I'm saying is it's not as big a problem as people make out. If you can't fine-tune the bias, yes, you might lose a little bit of treble, you might lose a little bit of bass, whichever direction it is, but it's not actually going to be a huge amount. And if you didn't know that there was a problem, you wouldn't hear the problem. Levels is something different. You've got to turn the levels up to be loud so that you can compare two things. But as Kelvin said last week, just turn the volume up, and it makes a difference. It was, Wasim says that, hang on, let's Dolby Labs did a lot of work on standardization. The deck with Dolby had worked within tolerances to operate correctly. That's true. And Wasim says, fascinating stuff. Must have been interesting to work in the industry back in the day. It was actually. It's a lot of this is something I find a little bit annoying about a lot of these YouTubers that are. They look back at stuff. Why did they do that? Well, because that was the only way you could do it at that time. 5 years later, they weren't doing it that way. They were doing it the way they would currently do it. But at the time, electronics was expensive. That's why they had. We're back to that argument again about why are 1970s cassette decks easier to maintain than 1990s cassette decks? Is it because they were cheaply made? No, it's because the 1990s ones had computers and chips and things in them, which didn't exist in the 1970s, so they couldn't put them in. And yes, the 1990s ones worked better, but when they go bang, and that's the end of it. Whereas the 1970s ones, you just replace a rubber band and off you go. It's not that the 70s ones were better, it was just that's what the technology was at the time. It was fascinating. So was the move from analog to digital and back. Yeah, well, you see, this is what my video on the size of the signal to noise ratios was all about, because the biggest problem with digital recordings wasn't that they were digitally recorded, it was that the engineers recorded them and they happened to be recording them digitally, because they didn't leave them alone. They didn't put the analog signal that we already had and knew and loved onto the digital replay device. They fiddled with it. They gave it the ability to have the dynamic range, and people didn't like that. Well, they did at first, and then they say, well, do I really want to hear that woman's tongue lapping in and out as she's doing whatever on the quiet bits? I'm talking about playing instruments here. Don't get any rude ideas, but you know what I mean. Breathing, snorting, and all that sort of thing was all happening, and because you had the ability to play it and to record it, they were. Andrew, you're off then. Okay, thank you very much for coming in, and I'm glad you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you next week. And I'm glad you found something to contribute to, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. So good night, Andrew, and I'll say hopefully catch you next time. Wasim says, yes, it was staggering. I went from moving away from cassettes and back again 4 to 5 years ago. This is the thing. There is a lot of people who are digitalising cassettes. If you digitalise a cassette, guess what you get as a result? You get a digital sound that sounds exactly like the cassette, which is good, isn't it? And that's because, and if you watch my video on signal noise ratios, you'd understand, a cassette's 70 dB, maybe 80 dB if you've got a really good Dolby S deck, and if you could find the signal to feed into it that was that wide, although most people use records, and records were 50 to 60 dB. And if you play that back on a CD equivalent digital playback, you've got 90 to 96 dB, which is between 1 billion and 3 billion times the noise of dropping a pin, which means, quite simply, that your million times sound now let me get this right. The 202 does have optical. I don't know if it's got optical in. I think it's got optical out. The UFO, the one the red one has optical out, I think, but the silver one doesn't. It's only got USB. But if you want to, if you go into mini discs, recording digitally mini discs, I see what you mean. But doesn't a mini disc have an analog input anyway? In which case, there's no point, because it's gonna do its own digital conversion anyway. Just thinking. Let me just bring that up. I did a video on those. Just want to get I don't like getting things wrong, so I will just try and not get things wrong. That's the one. And type into the Behringer, B-E-R-H. No, B-E-R. I can't remember how to spell Behringer now. That's 2-0. Right. There's 28 things with 2-0 in them. That's a lot, isn't it? Dong, 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 dong. Oh yeah, let me just show you something. This is go here. No. That one. Fade. Right. Just out of interest, this was the little speaker I was on about. They are absolutely amazing. They look like jet engines, and they are absolutely amazing. If you want a bit of sound, just to like in your car or something, well worth a go. But I was just trying to find I think it's the 202. I'm doing something wrong, obviously. Must be on the next page, or even bottom of that page. Let's have a go. It's really embarrassing when you can't find stuff. Ah, there we go. That's right, that's what I was on about. Okay, so the 222, either the UCA 222 or the UCA 202, has got an optical. The UFO hasn't. That's only USB. But the beauty of the UFO is that it's got RIAA input and magnetic cartridge input, as well as line input. But the 222 and the 202, the UCA, is only line input, but it does give you digital optical output. I hope that answers the question. And I hope I can find me again. Hang on. There's me. Fade. Boom. There we go. So, hopefully that answers the question. whether you're going to get any advantage with it is another question, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, what seems as I'm over 30 years late to the mini disc party. Never had one until last month. Oh right, you got yourself one. Have you seen all of Techmoan's videos on mini discs? Because they're an optical and magnetic disc, I believe, or is it magnetic and optical? And yeah, it's a mix. It's a composite disc. It's not totally CD. Yeah, he's had great fun with them. So what one have you got then, Wasim? I always wanted one. I wanted a DAT as well, but the problem was they were very expensive, and then they got sort of stomped on by the the record companies, which is a real pain. Have another slurp. But as I say, I think if you'll find that there's no real advantage in recording it digitally as such, because the Behringer is just going to convert it to digital, then you're just going to shove that in. Whereas if it's got a line input, you might as well go straight into the line input, and it will do its own digital conversion, which, to be honest, could be better. Because now let me see if I can get this right. We actually had a this is nothing to do with mini discs, but just bear with. Right, yes. Wasim says you might be right. The NetMD recorders, you transfer the files from laptop to mini disc. Yeah. We had a way back when Sky was not digital, and we had a TiVo, which was one of the original TiVos, and it was you shoved analog video into it and it recorded it digitally, and it produced absolutely smashing pictures, and the pictures were much better than the Sky pictures that were, you know, when you could go onto different channels, and some of the channels were really bad sampling rate and whatever, and it was great. The TiVo was really good, even on its longest play setting. It really produced good results. However, the end results were that the TiVo produced a good picture, but what I'm getting at is that even though they were technically the same specification, they weren't as good when you sort of mix them together. And I'm just thinking that you'll probably find that the mini disc will do a better job of it than the Behringer would when you've then shoved it into the mini disc. But having said that, the Behringers do a very good job. I don't think anybody's got any complaints. I think even Stephen's doing all right with his Behringer now, unless you've had anything change. Right. Anyway, we're getting on now for, what is it, quarter past 10. So it's we've been going for a while. What I suggest is, if there's anything anybody would like to talk about, whack it up now quickly, and we'll do a very quick synopsis. Other than that, then we'll call it a night, because it's getting late, and some people have got things to do, and I do appreciate you guys for being here. I think I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It wouldn't be the same without you. Right, Wasim says thanks. That's all from me. Okay, well, thank you very much, Wasim. It's nice to see you again. And Stephen, are you still around? If you're not, then I say good night. You might catch this on the replay. And Kelvin, thank you very much for being here, Kelvin. I do appreciate it. And again, I've enjoyed this today. It's been it's been quite lively. So thank you very much for coming, guys, and I'll just say good night to all of you. I hope it's given you something to think about, and hopefully see you next week. If you think of anything in between time you'd like to chat about, then send me an email or message me somehow, and I'll make sure to research it and or cover it, whichever works. Anyway, so that's it then, chaps. That's any sort of chaps, and I'll see you next week. Cheers. Bye bye.